I hope I'm not the only one who felt that the idea of role models was a bit awkward growing up, and that it was taking up far more time in school than I ever figured it would need. I vividly remember in school having multiple assignments, quizzes, or tests, or presentations, or essays about your role model. And it always struck me as odd, but I never knew, and I had the information and the knowledge that I had now to really put together why it's such an awkward exercise to put kids through. And in essence, I think that the idea of role models is bad, and that idolizing adults is a huge mistake. However, in doing so, I acknowledge that there is value in the behaviors and actions of role models and what they can teach young people about success and about pathways to success by engaging in various behaviors and tailoring your work to suit the goals that you want to achieve. From the perspective of educators, I can totally understand the need to create a sort of flow from point A to point B so that young people who are still learning what it is they like and learning what it is they may want to do when they're older have a sort of pattern that they can follow, or a sort of schematic where they can see, okay, if I want to be an astronaut, if I want to be a ballerina, if I want to be a painter, these are some of the things that I might have to do because this astronaut or this ballerina or this painter also did them. However, when we start to get into idolization, when we start to get into role models and we start to focus on the person rather than the actions and the behaviors, this is where it veers into territory that I think is much more harmful than good. And I believe that when I was young, I was already sensing this subconsciously. I was feeling that sort of pull, but I couldn't put my finger on it, and I certainly couldn't express it the way that I can now. I think the first reason why role models are dangerous is because it runs antithetical to one of the most important lessons of growing up. And that lesson is that your parents are flawed. This is a lesson that every kid has to learn eventually. Some are unfortunate and they learn it very early in life or very late in life. Hopefully, all of you listening learn it at an appropriate age, somewhere in your teens. I think that is where I first realized that my mom and dad didn't have all of the answers to life. And this is a really important pivotal moment because it opens the door essentially to the rest of your development. Because if you think about it, if you're born to someone that has all the answers and can feed you and protect you and have fun with you for the rest of your life, there's no need for you to grow and evolve and change in most cases. But if they're flawed, if they're imperfect, if they make mistakes, then that gives you the opportunity to go in different directions. And so that was one of the first times that I really thought, you know what, I need to solve these things for myself, when I discovered that my parents didn't have all the answers. And I think that having a role model in the sense of, wow, this person is so perfect, is very dangerous because it actually erases a lot of that work and it creates this false sense of superiority in someone who we all know has to be flawed in some way. Now, while it's easy to go down the rabbit hole of all the different psychological problems that can arise from role model worship, I want to focus on two in particular that I think are hurting a lot of people, even late into their lives. The first is the idea of sunk cost fallacy and not updating mental models. The second is this idea of superiority, that some people are just better role models than others. Let's start there. While initially the idea that some people are better suited to being role models than others seems innocuous or innocent, it's actually quite insidious. Essentially, what it tells young people is that some people are just naturally superior to others in some way, usually in the form of success or achieving your goals. And while that can be true for objective things, if you use measurements like how much money you made or how much education you got, once you get old enough, you realize that the world is not really made of these rules. And these rules or these measurements are just arbitrarily and usually artificially imposed by people, most often to gain an advantage over others. What was valuable 500 years ago isn't valuable today, and probably what's valuable today won't be valuable in 500 years from now. We may not even use money 500 years from now, for that matter. That's a bit too philosophical for this video, but the idea is still the same. When you engage in role model idolization, you're basically saying that you think some people are better than others. And this idea of superiority built into a species is detrimental to everyone. When some people are better or superior, you're opening the door to start to believe that some people are worse or inferior. And you can see how from there, it can really snowball into very negative, very harmful thinking. Additionally, the idea of a role model creates a power imbalance, whether it's based on power, authority, influence, skill, achievement, etc. These power imbalances do not serve the person who is being told to idolize the role model. They always serve the role model who is being idolized by the younger, more impressionable people. And this is not to say that this only happens to very young, naive people. I'm sure you've seen in social media alone adults being manipulated by other adults who they idolize because they're a really good singer or a really good athlete. There are dozens of scams that you can pull out from the news in the last 5 years alone by successful people who are deemed by society as quote-unquote role models, despite engaging in behavior that manipulates their fan base, the people that are told and taught to idolize them, even as they grow into adulthood. And growing into adulthood is difficult enough as it is. When you layer on these additional obstacles, no wonder people struggle so much. And this is where the sunk cost fallacy and updating mental models comes into play. When you subscribe to the idea of role models, especially at a young age, and you carry that idea and that logic with you into adulthood, you're going to engage in the sunk cost fallacy. Because you've spent all this time idolizing this role model, modeling your behavior after them, doing the things that they do, when you're presented with an alternative way of doing things, perhaps even a better way of doing things, you're more likely to stick to what you know and therefore commit the fallacy of sunk cost. Worse yet, people use the sunk cost fallacy to justify the actions of idols that they hold in high esteem. I'm sure you know someone who, for example, was a huge fan of Drake's as a teenager, grew up listening to him all throughout high school, into university, called themselves a big Drake fan, and then was faced with the reality of whether they would continue to be a Drake fan or not once Drake made mistakes, and those mistakes came to light and were magnified by social media and the news and tabloids. Herein lies the crucial mistake that people make. Rather than taking the time to update their mental models and say, listen, this person who I've idolized, who I've seen as a role model for years, potentially even for a decade plus, no longer aligns with me. Rather than doing that work, which is painful, which takes time, which takes reflection, which takes admitting that you were wrong in some way, people will just go on defending the person that they already liked, the person that they already saw in a role model capacity. They will do mental gymnastics. They will bend the truth or bend their reality to suit their existing narrative, rather than rewriting the narrative, taking the narrative down a new path. While this may be insignificant when it comes to liking a rapper or not, it speaks to a larger problem that a lot of people experience, which is that they settle in to one way of thinking, one way of being, one set of rules, and they never bother to update them as they get older, as they're presented with new information, as their reality changes, as the world around us and the social contract that we are all in changes and updates. This is probably the most damaging long-term effect of people who engage in having role models and idolizing adults in their early years. The good news is it's reversible. All we have to do is teach people that when you're highlighting someone as a role model, you're focusing on their behaviors. You're focusing on the things that they're doing to achieve success rather than the person. Focusing on the behaviors and the actions and the outcomes rather than on the person is a less humanizing process. However, it's important here because we want to separate the person from the actions and from the behaviors so we can isolate the good ones without having to lump them in with inevitably some of the bad ones. So the next time someone asks you who your role model is, don't name a person. Name an idea, an attitude, a behavior. We can still extract the best of people without engaging in harmful role model behavior. If this conversation gave you some hope, pass it on. Thanks.